This is the EO Radio Show's 100th episode. I'm Dave Bruns, Director of Client Services at Farella Braun Martel. To mark this milestone, I'm taking over as today's host. My guest is Farella partner and the founder and host of EO Radio Show, Cynthia Rowland. Today, we'll shine a light on Cynthia and talk about her path to becoming a prominent lawyer in the nonprofit sector and the common legal challenges her clients face.
Welcome to the EO Radio Show, your nonprofit legal resource. Brought to you by the Exempt Organizations Group at Farella Braun Martel. My name is Cynthia Rowland, and I'm a partner at Farella. I'm a business and tax lawyer with more than 30 years of experience advising clients on nonprofit and charity law. Through this podcast, our lawyers and guests will discuss a range of legal and business issues impacting the nonprofit world because we understand you work hard every day to make your community a better place to live and do business. Many of our programs focus on the basics, and at times we'll do a deep dive into narrow and complicated legal issues. Again, welcome to the EO Radio Show. We're glad you're here.
I'm Dave Bruns, Director of Client Service at Farella Braun Martel, and it's my pleasure to take over today's EO Radio Show podcast, especially as my guest is the podcast founder, Cynthia Rowland. Cynthia is a business and tax lawyer who enjoys working with philanthropists, including private individuals, as well as for-profit and nonprofit organizations. She aims to make the world a better place. Her broad experience includes entity formation, business transactions and agreements, regulatory compliance matters, partnerships and joint ventures, and mergers and dissolutions. She also advises trustees and directors of charitable organizations on fiduciary and tax issues. Cynthia has a particular expertise in the legal and tax issues of corporate philanthropy. She assists business enterprises using philanthropy to benefit their communities, push the boundaries of emerging science and technology not yet adequately funded by private capital, and other emerging approaches to the betterment of the planet and its inhabitants. Her clients seek her advice when pursuing charitable co-ventures, fundraising, formation of corporate foundations, and other types of social benefit corporations and entities. She has provided annual updates to the California CEB Treatise, advising California nonprofit corporations, for more than 25 years. She has served in leadership roles on nonprofit committees at local, state, and national bar associations, and is recognized in the annual publication honoring the best lawyers in America in the specialties of nonprofit, charitable law, and tax law. Congratulations, Cynthia, on the EO Radio Show's 100th episode. I'm so proud of this milestone for you. It's absolutely amazing that you've kept with this and really created an amazing tool for you and your practice.
Thanks, Dave. It's been really fun. I really enjoy it. And most podcasts don't make it anywhere near 100 episodes. So I'm really proud to have enough content to talk about and enough people who want to talk with me. So it's been really fun.
Let's dive into the questions. Why did you decide to create the EO Radio Show podcast?
Well, thanks to you for putting the idea in my head. And when you first mentioned it, I was like, oh, who would listen to me talk about this? But I did think about it because we started this early in the COVID era. I think it was January of 21 that the idea first came up, and it took about 6 months to actually get it launched. But from very early in my career, I did live seminars regularly with other colleagues in the accounting and the banking and the same sort of networking that I do now. But we had done it in person. When COVID hit, our regular series of nonprofit seminars obviously came to a screeching halt. We tried doing some webinars, but that was very difficult to reach a good audience and have the networking event effect I was hoping for. So when you offered the idea of doing a podcast, I was actually listening to a lot of podcasts at the time and fun areas that I'm interested in. And I knew that was kind of a growing channel for reaching audiences. And there weren't any competitors. We did do some looking around to see if there were other lawyers in the field doing a podcast, and there didn't seem to be anything out there. So it seemed like a good idea. And there wasn't, it just took my time, and I had plenty of that on my hands. That's how it came to be.
The name is really catchy, EO Radio Show. How did you come up with that?
Well, I was listening to some other podcasts, like I mentioned, and the idea of doing it as a radio show kind of format that would cover a lot of different topics and be regular. I wanted to be committed to a regular posting so that it would be something that people could follow rather than random and not very often and so forth. So I used the name to push myself to do a lot of content. And I really meant for the show to do 5 different things that are sort of related, but radio show, a broad kind of topic for this sector. That was my initial intention, is I wanted to get the content out to nonprofit organizations and the people involved with them, and create a body of work that would be a reference point and would be something that people in the industry would tune in to see, oh, okay, what's new this week? What's interesting? I also wanted to keep myself sharp and current on current events and also diving into different topic areas. And so pushing myself to do a regular radio show type format, I thought would do that. And I wanted a networking effect. I wanted to include people that I could interview in work in the same field, but aren't necessarily lawyers. I do interview a number of lawyers on, especially in our firm, on content areas that are tangent to it, but also people outside of the law, the accountants, the investment advisors. We did one on cybersecurity. We did one on appraisals with an art appraiser, things like that. I wanted the networking effect to continue. I wanted to create a body of reference work for current clients so that when there's, somebody says, oh, I don't understand this public support test. What's that all about for charities? Well, I've got some episodes. Like go, listen to this one. It's already there in my voice. It'll answer all your questions because I know what you're asking. I do this a lot. It's for that purpose. And then finally, and not the starting point, but the final use is to attract new clients, or at least give people who reach out to me to see if I am a good fit for them. They can get to know me a little better, find out. Because sometimes the whole answer is in existing podcasts. I thought the format would be useful for those 5 key areas.
One of the things that I find interesting too about the podcast medium is the reach that it has. And I know that we post to our website and some other things, but how did you determine where people can access the podcast?
Yeah, it's interesting. Podcasts actually have a lot of different distribution channels. And I think that's kind of our modern era. Everybody has a slightly different way that they find the content they want. So, of course, we post them all to our website. The firm has set up the distribution on all the podcast players. So you can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and so on. But somebody has to go to that resource to find it. So we also promote it through LinkedIn, reaches much of the professional community. About 18 months ago, I think, or a year ago, YouTube added the facility where you can upload just podcasts. So it doesn't have to be a video. The firm has a robust YouTube channel now with a lot of playlists, and those playlists for the EO radio show are specific to content. So, for example, we've got a private foundation playlist, and there's a hot topics playlist, and there's a fraud on this most recent series, the fraud playlist. So now, if somebody's searching YouTube for that content, they'll find it. Or more commonly, I can direct somebody to it and say, if you want to find out more about private foundation rules, for example, go and here's the link to our playlist on private foundations. So that's been helpful. And we also have distribution to lawyers through JD Supra, which is a specific distribution, and that reaches a lot of lawyers. We get really good data back from that one. So it's distributed a lot of different ways, and I expect that'll evolve, and we'll find new ways to get the word out so that people can find it.
So as you self-reflect on the 99 episodes that you've done, do you have any favorites?
I do. I think that's a cool question. My absolute favorite is the couple of episodes we did on the Apple TV series Loot. Hans Young and I watched that series. It's a workplace comedy, but it's focused on the private foundation established by a very wealthy philanthropist in the story. Maya Rudolph stars in that series. And it's so funny to me because it reflects in a humorous way a lot of what I've seen over the last 30 some years. And I love Maya Rudolph. So talking to Hans about it was just really fun. The episodes I enjoy the most are where I interview other people to talk about their expertise, like Sly Atai on the fraud episodes. I talked to Andrea Roth on appraisals very early on. That was terrific. Our own firm attorneys, Stephanie Hood, has done some great episodes with me, and many, many others that I've spoken with. So I really enjoy the interviews because I learn something every time.
That's fantastic. It is always fun when you have a co-presenter, right? It makes it a little more interesting. At least it gives you some repertoire and back and forth. How did you build a law practice advising the nonprofit sector?
Yeah, that's a fun question to answer. It sort of was always the intent, but what has happened has exceeded all my expectations. So when I was in law school, I took some tax classes and I did well in tax. And then I was very lucky in my 3rd year to do a seminar on exempt organizations tax law, and then was hired by the professor who taught that class to work in a mid-sized firm doing general income tax. And I actually was not at all interested in partnership and corporate tax for businesses. I found that really less than satisfying, but I loved the work on exempt organizations. And it was just a tiny bit at the time. And so I just took it on myself to build a practice there. And I volunteered in a number of bar association committees on exempt organizations, subspecialties, and just educated myself and built a practice with the exempt organizations, which was very small. But the funny thing that happens when you work with exempt organizations is you get to know the board members, and the board members are philanthropists, and the philanthropists have other ideas. And the field has grown a lot in the last 30 years. But I've always stayed on task that, these are the most interesting projects. These are the most interesting topics. And so fast forward, it feels like it's been fast, 35 years. And I have a really fun practice with a lot of different kinds of exempt organizations and with a lot of philanthropists who do a lot of really interesting and complicated things.
I find your practice really interesting because it's such a mix of tax, corporate, a little bit of employment. Every once in a while, there's an IP issue. Sometimes there's a litigation issue. I mean, I think that within the firm, you have one of the most broad-based, might be a way to think about it, types of practices, even though it's so focused in the nonprofit or the exempt org space, right? So you've got like all of these things that you get access to and all of these different areas of law. So I would assume that like your day-to-day is never the same.
That's exactly right. And the other area that's really big in my practice is real estate. And we definitely need the real estate support from the firm. It's really interesting to be really effective as a lawyer in the philanthropy space. You obviously need very deep expertise in the exempt orgs and charitable tax planning rules because they're complicated. And you also need an understanding of the general regulatory structure at the state level for nonprofit, usually corporations, but also trusts and different kinds of entities. And then you need this broad issue spotting ability for all these other areas. You might have a UBIT question, but that also may, for unrelated business income tax, but that may also implicate a number of other areas. And one of the wonderful things about our firm is that we have the expertise in most of the tangent areas, the employment, the real estate, the IP, and so forth. So yes, every day is different. It's really fun right now. It was extremely difficult the first 10 or 20 years. And now it's gotten to be a lot more fun because, 20 years of learning from your mistakes tends to make a lawyer a better lawyer. Mm-hmm. So, here I am.
It also gives you a nice big brand within the market, right? I can't imagine there's a lot of lawyers in the world, but I'm not sure how many specific nonprofit lawyers like you there are. So I think you picked a good niche.
There's a few. And I always say I would never claim to be the best at what I do, but I don't think there's a lot who are better, just, head and shoulders. A lot of people have specific areas where they've really excelled and they're known. So it's a great field of practitioners. Really, really fun to be around and be a part of the exempt orgs legal field.
We talked in the intro and kind of in your commentary about a few of the types of nonprofits. But, when you think about your clients, it's all over the map, right? There's some small, some big, some are corporate. Like, how do you kind of define that universe of clients that you want to support other than, as you had said, and I think foundationally, and having worked with you for almost 20 years, know that it's the goals of the organization are almost as more important. Are they doing good work? What types of nonprofits do you represent?
Well, they're kind of, in over 35 years, there have been a lot of different types. Under 501c3, I should say 501c, which is the statutory section that defines tax exempt organizations. C3 is just one of many. A lot of those I haven't dealt with, like I don't represent unions or other things like that. But there are C4 that generally thought of as political at this point, but they're not political action committees. There's C4s. There's all sorts of C3s that I've helped over the years, from hospital-related organizations to universities to museums, private foundations that make grants, operating foundations that do specialized work, public charities that are community foundations, public charities that are focused on one particular issue. It's a huge range. Oh, and social clubs. There have been a few 501c7s over the years. So it's a huge array, and I'm game to help whoever comes to me if they've got a question that I think I can answer. And it's just a lot of fun. And then in addition to the huge array of public charities and exempt organizations, the flip side of that are the donors. the philanthropists and the founders. And so I do a lot of work directly for the individuals, and that evolves often into kind of family office advising, which is another whole array of business transactions, which is complementary. You know, if you see art loan transactions from the museum side, it makes you a better lawyer on the lender, the person who owns the artwork. So for all these things, being on both sides of the transactions makes you more sensitive to what the other side, you know, wants to do. So I think as a transactional lawyer, it's really fun to be on the exempt org side often and on the philanthropist side with a good amount of frequency.
What advice would you give to nonprofits in terms of governance and compliance to avoid legal pitfalls as they're developing early on in their careers, you know, and you're establishing yourself as being a nonprofit and you're reaching out to donors and trying to really build, you know, you've got a big vision. What are the few things that they should be worried about?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I get contacted a lot by people who are at the very beginning of their philanthropy journey. I have a great idea. This is so important. Or there's been this disaster in my community. I want to create a nonprofit to help. It's just a lot of people that are starting down this path of making the world a better place. And that's great. The place to start, though, is like anything else new, do the homework. The founders need to educate themselves on the regulatory structure because exempt organizations, charities, are hugely regulated at the federal tax level, but also at the state level. If someone's coming into something wanting to do international philanthropy from the U.S. and raise money here to benefit a really important cause, there's just an enormous amount of regulatory and legal structure and accounting and solicitation. There's just so many rules. And so starting with your lawyer and expecting the lawyer to educate on all that and take you by the hand through all that can be a very expensive and time consuming process. So what I tell the newcomers is the very first thing to do is educate yourself on the basics of the regulatory structure, write a business plan, develop a 3-year budget so that you know how much money you're realistically going to need, where you're going to raise it from, and look at the competition. Look at the competitive landscape for the services you want to provide, the donors that you think will fund it, and the workforce and volunteers you're going to be able to attract, and really have a plan. And then finally, for those areas of expertise where the founder is not an expert, get those experts on board, either pro bono, if you've got the connections to do that, or figure out how you're going to pay them. And that's going to include competent accountants, because accounting for charities is subspecialty. It's definitely something that not all accountants know how to do or want to do. So find your experts, legal, accounting, investment management, fundraising, and fill in those gaps in the founders or the founding board members in their expertise. And do that homework before you hire the lawyer, and certainly before you incorporate. A lot of times the startups get themselves in a hole because ready, fire, aim approach. Let's just incorporate. The forms are very easy. And we do a whole series, by the way. Joe Hilliard and I have a whole series on the state law formation requirements. Forming a nonprofit's really easy and pretty cheap. But that corporate entity, once it's created and you start trying to fill in all these blanks, it can be a lot more efficient to do the homework first.
Or perhaps listen to the EO radio show's 99 other episodes.
That would be a good start. Yeah. Yeah. Or at least start with a playlist and find a few that seem to be relevant to the new organization.
Well, that's fantastic. One of the things I wanted to ask you is geography that important? You said that if you cross international boundaries, it seems to be a big issue. But do you need to be founded where you're working, or can you be like a corporate entity? Are you all founded in Delaware? Does that make a difference? It
can more and more often, because just like everything else in our business world, the fluidity of operating across geographies is so much easier now because of technology. If you're geographically based and serving a particular geography, probably incorporating in the state where you're working is the most efficient. If you'll be fundraising nationally or internationally, or you'll be providing services in more than one state, then a lot of times Delaware is a good choice. It really depends.
Going back to the don't ready, fire, aim. Aim, ready, fire.
Yeah, exactly. Let's do one step at a time. Figure out what your plan is. And a lot of times you can start with one thing and then evolve into the other. You can start local and do a proof of concept to see if it really works, and then build the infrastructure to reach out to more parts of the world.
Do you have any thoughts on what your future episodes are going to be? Can we look into the crystal ball and see what's coming?
Absolutely. And it started early on. It was a lot of stress on myself to figure out what I was going to talk about next. But now it just kind of naturally lands on my plate. the immediate next few episodes are finishing out the international grant making series that I've just started. I've gotten some requests from listeners for advice about using foundation management companies or outsourcing the back office sorts of stuff. So I have a planned episode on that. And there's also been a request for more information about unrelated business income tax and how to think about that. So those are the ones in the immediate future. Hopefully there'll be many more. And I'm always open to what listeners would like to hear about, because we all want to talk about what people want to hear and not just what I want to say. And there's plenty of those episodes in there already. Is there a URL or a feedback mechanism you want people to hear about, or just email you? What's the best way to give that feedback? We have an email box, eoradioshow@fbm.com. That's eoradioshow@fbm.com. And we monitor that inbox for listener ideas. So that's the best place to send requests for particular topics. Well, fantastic. Well, that kind of completes our show today. Before we go though, Dave, can I shout out my thank yous? There's so many. You definitely can shout out some thank yous. I want to first of all thank our producers, Cheryl Loof. She's been an absolute rock star in pulling all this together. All of the people I've interviewed, I should have built a list of all the names, but it's probably too many to describe here, but particularly Joe Hilliard, who's been game on the state law, the lawyers at Farella. We've interviewed many of them. And you, Dave, thanks for the idea. Thanks for the prodding over the years. It's like, hey, try something new, what can you lose? It's like, it's been a really fun journey, and maybe you and I can talk again in another 100 episodes. 100%. I would love to interview you again after another 100 episodes. I think this has been a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed watching the growth and the expansion and the focus. I think the overall EO radio show, as it's evolved from its, episodes 1 and 2 to now as we're hitting the number 100, I think it's really impressive, and you've created an amazing resource. So I think that you've achieved that goal. Thank you. It's been really fun. Fantastic. Well, so, today, this is our 100th episode, and I'm so proud to be the takeover host. Again, my name's Dave Bruns, and you've been listening to the EO Radio Show, your nonprofit legal resource, brought to you by the Exempt organization group at Farella Braun Martel. If you have any further questions about what we've talked about today, or suggestions for topics you would like us to discuss, please send us an email at eoradioshow@fbm.com. That's eoradioshow@fbm.com. Thank you for joining us, and until next time, let's make a difference.